Okay, I want to thank you for joining us tonight. This is our webinar on making offers. So, what we want to do with this webinar is actually equip you with the know how to make an offer on the spot with a distressed homeowner. So, what we're going to do is we're going to walk you through a contract, the necessary documents you're going to need, and we are going to package that and make sure we have a file that you can get that at, and so that you'll never be empty handed if the opportunity arises to make an offer on the spot. We are going to present tonight a one-page offer versus our California Association of Realtor 10-page offer that most people are accustomed to. We're going to discuss the ins and outs of using a realtor versus not. One term we're going to need to know is proof of funds, EMD, which stands for earnest money deposit. We're going to discuss letter of intent. And so moving forward, what I want to do is kind of give you a scenario of how this works. So many times we're out door knocking or we're sending our letters, trying to ask for referrals. And there's times we'll be out there and people will actually invite us in on the spot. And in that moment, they're usually going through a very tough time and they don't know you. There's no relationship established. Really, what they want is to sell their home, get out of a bad situation. And so they kind of want to know what you're willing to offer right then and there. So what we've experienced is if you don't make that offer and they don't sign, you can actually move on and they will talk to their friends and family and other real estate agents. And the next thing you know, you've lost that transaction. And so when it comes to making these types of offers, again, we want to equip you with everything you need to make it on the spot. So I'm going to walk you through an offer that I've written out. And the sample property is 123 Main Street here in Fountain Valley, which actually may or may not exist. But I want to walk you through what that contract looks like, what to put on there, and then the most important part is make sure you get it signed. So we'll go ahead and go over that offer. The first one is going to be, this one's going to be on the car form. Okay. So hopefully all of you can see that. I'm going to expand it a little bit. So this is called an RPA, or a residential purchase agreement. We like in the real estate world just to call it an RPA. So remember that RPA stands for Residential Purchase Agreement. And as you can tell, I wrote this out by hand today. And that's all you need to do. As long as you have this paperwork handy, you can quickly write it out. And you don't need a computer. These days, everybody's accustomed to just having it, digitally produced with a computer, and it looks all fine and dandy and nice. But you don't need that. You can actually have it scribbled out just like I do. So this is today's date. You want to make sure it's on there. And this is an offer from me, Samuel J. Weaver. If you want to use your LLC or your corporation, you would have that in place of your name. All right. The real property to be acquired, you want to make sure you know the address. And again, here you are, you're talking to a family and they say, hey, we want out of this thing. And you say, well, for people that want out, we actually make a cash offer. And if you've done a little due diligence before going over there, or if you have an idea already of what you'd be willing to offer on that property, and or you've sat there and done the research in front of them or on a computer or on your phone, and while there, my advice is make the offer then and there. So for this particular price, Fountain Valley tends to be really expensive. So a fixer is hard to find for under $500,000, sometimes under $600,000. So we wanted to make this relative. So the purchase price offered, you write it out, $550,000. And then over here, you actually use the numerals. Close of escrow shall occur on, you can write the date, or you can just put number of days. We like to give ourselves 2 weeks, depending on the seller situation, just to do our due diligence and make sure there's nothing wrong with title or nothing wrong with the property that may force us to walk away. but generally you can put 10 days. A lot of this depends, guys, on your financial backing. Hard money, we generally want to give ourselves 7 to 10. If you're all cash, theoretically, you could close in 3 if you felt comfortable with the property. Okay, so we aren't using realtors in our particular situation here. So this box isn't checked because there's not a relationship. There's not a listing agent. There's not a buyer's agent, otherwise referred to as a selling agent. So I like to write in NA. This does not apply. If we can get away with it, we're going to write down $1,000 deposit. Once in a while, you'll hear a seller go, well, you know, when I bought my house, I had to put a lot of money down. And so then, you know, you can negotiate that. Try to keep it under $10,000. And if you don't have, you know, 10 grand or something like that, that's going to pose a different problem. But it's pretty easy to come up with 1,000, even if you have to borrow it. So, you know, very rarely is somebody giving me a hard time that's a homeowner over $1,000 unless they're a realtor themselves. And then they want the traditional 3%. Now, when we overcome this objection, when people ask for 3% and you're buying a property all cash, you say a deposit is for someone who has contingencies or loan contingencies and things of that nature, where they may get denied a loan, and then you can keep the deposit because we waited too long and we didn't do what we were supposed to. We're closing this in under 2 weeks, all cash, and that's a pretty big deposit in and of itself, the $550,000. Usually people will understand it if you fight them a little bit and you don't give in, and it gives you reason to say, hey, I just want to put down $1,000. I still need to do my due diligence on this property. You know, I'm not here to waste your time. I'm going to find out if I'm going to buy it really quick. And if I find that I'm not, I won't waste your time. But I'm going to put up some money just so you know I'm serious. That deposit a lot of times is going to come either you wire it in. When it's only $1,000, I like to do just a cashier's check, sometimes a personal check. If there's no realtors involved, a lot of times they just don't even know when the deposit's actually in. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Just know you have to, you know, the official rules of real estate say that we need to get that deposit in 3 days after we sign this agreement. Generally 3 days after we open escrow, but within that, you want to do it right away. This is not something you want to mess around with unless you don't have the money, and then you can kind of mess around a little bit, but really you don't want to. That $1,000 there says that you're serious and you're actually going to, you know, enter into this contract. Okay, we definitely want to check the box that says all cash, unless the seller has given you the indication that they don't care and they maybe need a little more time to get their possessions out of the property, because we do want this thing vacant and cleaned up, at least with possessions when we buy it, so that it can save us on our demo costs. But generally speaking, we're always going to write, you know, check that box right there. The reason why they're in such a hurry to sell, they're in a distressed situation. They just want cash and they want to move on to the next chapter of their life. Okay, we're not doing any loans, so we don't have any of these boxes, no FHA. Now, if you were, because there's a chance you could buy a property with a FHA 203K loan if a seller allowed you to, and you had the time to do that, you could absolutely fill this information in. You know, 3.5% down, you know, you show those numbers, do some simple math. Here, more often than not, we're going to say cash or private money. So in additional financing terms, give yourself the private money loophole in case you're going to use hard money. And if someone messes with you on that, you say hard money is private money, it's private investors, or, you know, we help you raise the capital and you have your private money that way. Now, if you're fortunate enough to have your own cash, you're in a really good spot. So we made an offer for $550,000. We put $1,000 down to open escrow. And that means in 2 weeks, we need to come up with another $549,000 to close this, plus our closing costs. You're going to initial this is my SW for Sam Weaver. Now, the seller would initial right here on that page. The copy you're going to get when you registered for this webinar is going to have this all cleared out. So you won't have any of my personal broker information or anything like that. It'll just be blank, which is exactly how you want it. Escrow doesn't care as long as the terms are acceptable and agreed upon and signed by both parties. You have an executed contract. You can open escrow, and there's nothing anybody can say about it. So this particular RPA, or residential purchase agreement, is 10 pages long. And in the old days, this used to be a page or two, but because of disclosures, what you'll see coming up, it's increased in size. Let me go back up here because I want to view a single page. So here's page 2, and we're going to expand this a little bit. So you're going to want to write this address at the top. You know, this is our fake address, 123 Main Street in Fountain Valley. Again, my print isn't very good. I'm left-handed. It doesn't matter as long as everybody knows what we're talking about. Let me go back to page 1 real quick. One thing you're going to want to put in that I missed here, if you can, if you have the ability and you can find the information, make sure you put the APN number or the assessor's parcel number. This is like the social security number of real property. And this identifies it. If there was any question on your printing of the address, this would supersede that. All right, let's move on. Okay, so 123 Main Street, Fountain Valley, California, 92708, pretty clear. Today's date. One box we want to check if we're doing all cash is an appraisal contingency and removal. This agreement is not contingent upon an appraisal. So we are not getting a loan. It's not contingent on that appraisal. And everything else is kind of left blank. We don't have to fill out any of these normal forms unless there's real estate agents involved. Other terms, and you would want to write this in, but I'm going to leave it in. Property is being bought as is. No repairs required. Buyer waives the right to a warranty. Property be purchased with all cash or private money in 14 days or less, or as needed. A lot of homeowners don't want to move out in 2 weeks. They need more time because they have a lot of stuff. And so what you can do is or as needed, and explain that when you're sitting down with them. If you need more time, just let us know. But we can get it done in 14 days or less. No contingencies after 5, I should say days, inspection and due diligence period. Probably should write in days there. This is for the warranty or the termite inspection company. We just cross that out. No other, any other inspection you do is going to be for your own benefit, but that's not going to apply to this contract. Again, if you get an inspection done in the first 3 days and you see something that's going to scare you, like foundation issues, you're okay to walk away from this contract. No one's going to keep your deposit. And besides, you put down $1,000. Even if you got deep into this and couldn't close, $1,000 is something you should be able to get back pretty quick in this business. Again, make sure you sign, your seller signs as well. Let's move on to page 3. All right. Smoke alarms, anything like that. These are things that are California law that they need to be placed. Now, a property that needs to be fixed up, it's just not going to have these things. You're going to take responsibility. So you say buyer. All right. Buyer is going to take care of this. Traditionally, the seller would take care of that in a normal transaction. But because we're buying a fixer, we're going to take responsibility. We're going to take responsibility for compliance with any minimum mandatory government inspections and reports. We'll take on that. We'll do the NHD report, which is the natural hazard report. We'll take care of those things. Escrow and title. Okay, so this is one that can come back to bite you a little bit. Sometimes these sellers don't want to pay any costs. So here, if they didn't want to pay any costs, you wouldn't check the seller. You would just check buyer. And, buyer shall pay escrow fee. You wouldn't have to put each to pay their own. I try to get away with it if I can. Just say, well, you pay your fees, I'll pay mine. That's fair. Use words like that. And each to pay their own is traditional in real estate. And we want to use HLH escrow, care of Tracy King, because we can determine escrow costs. We can help ourselves save money here. When it comes to title insurance, this is very, very important. You want to make sure you get clear title. So you want an insured title policy for the amount of money you paid for that house. Again, This is something you can cover, but if you can get away with it, you always want to have both people pay their own. And most sellers aren't going to know of any title companies. So normally we would do seller's choice, but we're going to write in Fidelity National Title here because that's our guys, David and Kyle, that take care of us. So again, if I can get away with it, I want both of these boxes checked. Let them pay for their side, we pay for ours, and make sure you get a title binder. And I'll explain that in a later class, but a title binder is very important when we get title. All right, other costs. Let them pay county transfer tax. These fees add up, and that's something, again, you can cover them, but if you can get away with it, get the seller to pay their own. And you use language like, hey, you know what? I'm waiving the right to a home warranty. If you could just cover your fees for selling the property, you know, I'm not going to ask for anything that's above and beyond that. So here you check the box, buyer waives the purchase of a home warranty plan. Now, home warranties are standard in the industry, and they're paid for by the seller. And they're usually $500 to $600 these days. Well, they can range from $400 to $600 actually, but they're standard. It just means when you sell a property, it's kind of in good faith that, hey, if anything goes wrong, there's a small deposit you pay and everything gets fixed. Nothing else gets signed. Okay, here's one we've seen recently. Now, I wouldn't do this on a fixer, but if I were buying maybe a rental property, I might check this box and make sure that all brackets attached to the walls, floors, and facilities for any such component furniture or items shall remain with the property or will be removed, and holes or other damage shall be repaired. A lot of people have these large mounts for televisions and they leave gaping holes in walls. So, you know, this is something, if you can get away with it and you say, hey, just in good faith, do you think that's something that you could just patch for me? Just, you know, it's just one of those things. Again, make sure you initial, make sure they initial, make sure all parties who are on title sign this contract. If you just get one, a husband, and the wife doesn't, null and void, doesn't do you any good. Oh, we forgot to write in the address on this page. All right. We want to write 123 Main Street on this too. All right. Buyer intends or does not intend to occupy the property. If you're going to live there, you leave this alone. If you're going to fix it and sell it and you're not going to live there, you check that box, which says you do not intend to occupy the property. Okay, there are times that a seller will want to lease back the property from you or stay a little bit longer. In this underlined area, seller remaining in possession after close of escrow, you're going to want to figure that out. And there's forms that we can help you with if someone wants to do a lease back from you. You know, I don't like it. I like to take properties vacant. I generally don't like people in them. A lot of times they can create issues for you, especially if they're distressed or disturbed or mentally disturbed. Okay, and this is for tenant occupied properties. You know, most of the time when we're flipping a property, we're not going to have tenants involved. All right, traditionally, the seller has 7 days to disclose if the property's, you know, any of these things. You always want to shrink down that time because we're on a short timetable. So, you know, give them 3, give them 5 days to get their disclosures out. Make sure you initial here. They just initial there. And again, you can see why this contract has grown. A lot of disclosure type of information. So we're on page 4 out of 10. Let's go to 5. We wrote our address up there, today's date, bunch of disclosure. This one, for the most part, page 5, you initial, get them to initial. Most of the time, they're not reading through this stuff. All right, we're on to page 6. Again, we write our address at the top. This is timetables, so we really want to pay attention to timetables. All right, so seller has, we're gonna shrink this down. You'd write this in 5 days after acceptance to deliver to the buyer all reports, disclosures, information which seller is responsible under paragraphs 5, 6, and 7. This is where they tell you everything that they know about the property. Okay, if it has any issues, they're going to tell you in that disclosure report. If they did any work without permits, they need to let you know that. If there was a fire in the property, they need to tell you those things too. 3 days is a little short. Sometimes I put 4. We pushed this out. We wanted to fill it out right away because if we are closing in 14 days, now we only have 9 days, and sometimes weekends get busy. So this time period can go by really quick. All right, and buyer has 5 days after acceptance, unless otherwise agreed in writing, to complete all the buyer's investigations. So sometimes people want to limit this to 3, but 5 days, you can get an inspector out there, your contractor to give a bid, all those things within a week. 5 business days, which is really nice. Sometimes, I don't like to do this, but sometimes you'll see people remove all contingencies with their offer. So you would check this box. Generally speaking, a homeowner is not going to know anything about this, and you don't have to. When there's a lot of realtors that get involved that say, oh, you have to remove contingencies with the offer. So that's when they check that box. I'm not a fan. Kind of puts your earnest money at risk. And because you have no, kind of basically says that, well, I don't have any contingencies in order to get out of it. So it's not contingent on even an inspection. So I don't like to do that. And with a homeowner, again, most of the time you can get away without it. All right, initial at the bottom. They sign their part, and we're almost done with this 10-page document. All right, let's go to the next page. Again, address at the top. If you pre-print this, you'll have this all printed if you have the ability. Not everybody has Adobe Acrobat. Adobe Acrobat will actually, or Professional will actually let you type in all this stuff. All right, here's something important. You're going to want to do a final walkthrough on this in case there's just something you didn't see. Maybe, the homeowner took some things out that you weren't expecting them to. So you get to do a final verification within 2 days prior to close of escrow. So you're 2 weeks in, a couple of days before, you want to do a final walkthrough and make sure everything is the way it was when you originally saw the property. Okay, sign or initial the bottom there. Make sure your seller does the same. And we're almost done, guys. Now, again, address at the top, date. What you're going to see here is if we have to go through arbitration. And so I've seen people skip this, which means you go to court if there's any issues. And you just explain that. Look, it's going to be a lot cheaper to go through arbitration if there was any disputes. You can say, I've never been through arbitration on a property because everybody's been great, but you know what? This is something that we would have to sign in the event that we did. So otherwise we go to court and it's much, much more expensive. So most people just sign this, no questions asked. But again, some of these sellers that are distressed, they're strange and they may call you and have you go over every aspect of this contract. All right, moving on. Again, the address. This is basically just definitions of terms. Here's one thing you can do. You can actually give them 1 day to figure out if they want to take your offer. So you could do that. Traditionally, we get 3, but you can actually specify here that this expires at 5 p.m. next business day. Some people do that. Sometimes you want to kind of put a fire under their butt so they don't go talk to a bunch of people. Remember, as soon as this gets signed and you open escrow, you are set. They cannot traditionally cancel without a real valid reason. All right, so here we date. We want to print our name, Samuel J. Weaver. You can see my chicken scratch there and my signature. Make sure they sign below that, or their initials, actually. We're not doing, now, if there were 4 of you buying a property, you would have an additional signature addendum, which gives more space for additional buyers. Most of the time, it's just 1 person, right? Or you're signing on behalf of your LLC. All right. And the last page. This is where they accept the offer. They date and sign right here. Okay, so that's basically it. The number 32 is the acceptance of the offer. Now, if they want to counter you, okay, they can do that as well. So they would put check this, seller acceptance is subject to an attached counter. And that's seller's counter offer or a seller's multiple counter offer. Most people don't know how to do that. So they may just talk to you and then you just revise your purchase contract. But most of the time they just accept it. If you've talked about price in advance, I don't see why they wouldn't. We aren't doing any real estate agents in this particular example. If we were, that's where they would fill out their information. Here we just write NA. If you're going to do escrow, you might write in your HLH escrow. That's who we use. And if they reject it, traditionally they have to fill this out, but they don't have to do that in this case. One area they do need to initial to make this an executed contract is on this last page, page 10 of 10, right here. Buyer acknowledges that page 10 is a part of this agreement, which is this page right here. All right, don't need that. So basically that's all you would need. I know it seems like a lot to make an offer on a property. With it, many times we want these other documents. So you're going to want, if you're doing this under your personal name, you're going to want to write out a personal check. This does not get cashed. It's a copy of it. It just shows that you're serious and that you are who you say you are. Obviously, I've blanked out my address and my account number here. But this is today's date, $1,000. Always on the memo line, write purchase of the address. Shows them that you're not out just purchasing a bunch of, you're not making a lot of different offers on different properties, and makes them feel a little more special that you wrote their address on their check. All right, so this personal check, okay, is just, this is kind of what we call a formality. They're not cashing that check. This doesn't tell them whether you have the money in the bank or not. It's just a copy of a check. All right, moving on to proof of funds. You're going to want to show them that you have the money you say you do. Now, this is one that we received lately from a buyer. I just want you to, you can actually use your stocks, your stock type of accounts, your 401k and things like that. All right, here's a $2 million one. But most of us, for most of you out there, I can actually write a letter for you that looks something like this. So we have the ability to write you out a proof of funds. Something, if you're making offers, you're going to want at the beginning of the month. Now, this is one of our hard money lenders that we partner with, and he gave me the ability to write out a proof of funds on his behalf. This is current, says regarding credit line. This would be your name, and Mr. or Mrs. Your name has a $750,000 line of credit to purchase investment property in California. We've based this on his credit history and income. Do you have any questions? Now, the great thing about Mark is if anybody calls him, he will verify. I have that. He's said that many times. Sam, just have them call me. Because sometimes people question just a letter because it could be typed by anybody. The other option is, if you have the money in a bank account, that's your best bet. Just like the other one I showed, if you have stocks, 401k with a lot of money into, above and beyond your asking price, you're going to want to include that. If you don't, you need to get a letter like this from a hard money lender that shows that they'll back you. Or we need to get it from one of our private investors that would back you on your property as well. All right, if you are an LLC or a corp, you're going to want to show that you are legitimate. And here's my articles of incorporation for Fortune Weavers file in January of 2012. And very simple. Stamped by Miss Deborah Bowen, Secretary of State. And that just shows that I'm legitimate here. All right, let's go over the one page. The one page is very simple, and you guys will all receive this. I'm going to expand this out. Basically the same offer. It's just done on one page. And because I will tell you this, people that are a little older do not want to hassle with 10 doc pages. They just want to know that you're going to pay their closing costs, you're going to pay cash, and there's just no messing around. So you have to kind of determine who you're going to, which contract you would use. And you might want to have that conversation with them and find out where they stand on this. So you can say, hey, I have a 1-page document that outlines what we agree on, or we can use the actual agreement most realtors use, which is the CAR forms, which is 10 pages. It's whatever you're comfortable with. It just depends. But this is the same thing. So the parties agree, the parties agreeing to this are Samuel J. Weaver, buyer, and John Doe, seller. Whoever that person is, make sure they or who is on title. You can come up here. It doesn't matter as long as their name's here. And they're going to sell the property at 123 Main Street in Fountain Valley. It's in Orange County. If you're in Los Angeles County, obviously we're going to leave this blank for you. Buyer agrees to pay the seller, and seller agrees to accept at closing for the property $550,000, like you saw before. It's going to be contingent upon our inspection of the property. All right. If buyer gives approval, property purchase will be as is condition with no repairs. Property will be purchased with all cash or private money, just like you saw in the larger contract. It's going to be an earnest money deposit of $1,000 held in escrow by HLH Escrow. Or if you have your own escrow company that maybe you want to use, you'd write it in, which shall be credited to the buyer at the closing of the agreement. Seller needs to pay for their property taxes. Seller warrants that seller has good, clear, marketable title. We want to make sure we have clear title. All right. And that they can convey title to the buyer with a grant deed. If this was in the Midwest, this would be a general warranty deed. That title would change, and you would see, instead of title, you would see an attorney. But here in California, buyer will inspect title to the property, and seller will satisfy any encumbrances other than those listed above. Buyer will pay the cost of the transfer tax, recording fees. So here we're paying for everything. Now, again, this is all negotiable, so you can take this out. And fees on deed of conveyance and deed of trust, all associated loan fees, buyer's closing, escrow, and title fees. Again, if this were in another state, this would not say escrow. This would say buyer's closing and title fees and attorney's fees and mortgage, title, insurance policy, and owner's insurance policy. So those are all standard things. California, it's very simple because we have escrow and title. Seller to pay off all existing loans and liens on the property and their recording costs, all sellers' closing and title fees, escrow fees, and realtor commissions, if there are any. Time being of the essence, this agreement will be closed on or before 14 days and be extended as necessary to complete all paperwork required. This offer terminates if not accepted or countered by 3 days at 5 p.m. We're giving them 3 days to close the deal. All right, and you can add additional terms. It's contingent upon inspection. And we're the buyer, Samuel J. Weaver here, date, print your name, accepts this offer. Seller hereby accepts this offer, counters this offer. He can counter it or rejects it. Here he would write accept, his name, print, and you have on 1 page an executed contract. Escrow will accept this. No issues there. And this is the fastest way to make an offer. All right. So the hardest part about this, the hardest part is actually asking, are you ready to sign the contract? If I make you a fair offer that you deem acceptable, can we sign the paperwork today and get this started? I know you have a lot to get done, and I know you want to start the next chapter of your life. And they'll say, yeah, I'm ready. As long as that price is what you said it is, I'll sign right now. Let's get this done. Sometimes, depending on the seller, you might want to write a letter of intent. And that's where you write a letter saying why you really want to buy the property. If you're buying it to flip, I just don't think you need a letter of intent. But if you're buying the property to keep or as a rental, you might write a letter of intent. It's just where you say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. John Doe, I really like your property. My kids want to go to the schools in the neighborhood. I know the area well. I have friends in the neighborhood. Please accept my offer. That's a letter of intent. The key thing, though, again, get it signed right there. If you walk away and you give them time to think about it, you'll either get beat out by somebody else, it'll be listed by a realtor saying they can get, 50,000 more than you're offering, things like that. So that's why it's really important to have this offer at your disposal. We just had someone make an offer on a property that was a really good deal recently, and if they didn't have a purchase contract, that those terms might have changed drastically. Again, so the purchase contract we call an RPA, a residential purchase contract, because we're buying residential property in most cases. And ladies and gentlemen, I think that's all we have. I'm going to open this up for questions. Renee asks, what do you suggest for leaving a copy? I generally, if they have a scanner printer working, then we'll just do it right there. If not, I'll offer to take them down to the local print shop and get a copy right away. And sometimes I'll just say, hey, I'll be back in 15 minutes. I'm going to go make you a copy, and I'll be right back. If you feel free to come with me if you'd like. And but you do need to leave them a copy. That is very important. Sometimes you can offer to mail it the next day or fax it. Just depends. You do not need to be an agent to fill this out. Question by Dennis. No, you do not. A purchase contract can be filled out by anybody. A purchase contract can be on a napkin. As long as there's terms, there's dates, and an agreed price, it would actually be acceptable. In California, again, sometimes it could even be verbal. But yes, you can do this in person. You do not need a realtor. Matter of fact, if you get realtors involved, it can make this much more challenging. Janet asks, on page 1 of car forms, residential purchase agreement, RPA 7-1, the NHD, who pays? Generally here, we're always going to have the buyer paying. Seller doesn't know what that is. So us as investors, we're going to go ahead and pay for that. All right, Alejandro, when buying with an LLC, can you use the LLC's line of credit or use a lender with the LLC as the recipient of the funds? Yes, so your proof of funds would actually be to the LLC, not you personally. You would also provide a copy of your LLC paperwork, your operating agreement, or your bylaws, letting the seller know that you are in fact an active LLC in the state of California if you're buying here, or the state that you'd be buying in. So your proof of funds would need to have the LLC's name on that. Good question. All right, what's the next step after everyone is signed? Okay, good question. So next step is you have an executed contract. You're going to go in the next business day with your $1,000 and you're going to open escrow. And escrow will then basically send out an opening package. A lot of times you're going to deliver this, or they will mail or fax it to the seller. And that's what gets the ball rolling. You're going to do your inspections. You're going to get a contractor out there, your building inspector, do those things right away. Make sure that you're getting what you think you're getting. And that's the process. And this thing generally closes in 2 weeks. So first step, open escrow. You have your executed contract. Make sure you get disclosure package to the seller so they can do disclosures. Escrow will work with you on that. Nancy asks, is it good to bypass an inspection? No. I've learned this the hard way, where I bought a property, didn't do my inspection, and went up to put some wire in the attic and found out the property had been burned. It was a trust sale, so they had no idea. They didn't disclose it. And I had basically all the rafters, all the supporting beams on the roof were burnt and charred. So you're talking about a $20,000 issue. And so I always like to get an inspection, or I inspect myself. So if you're comfortable enough with an inspection and you've been through enough of them, you can go under the house and in the attic. But these days I like to pay the $250, $300 for the building inspector to do that. But I would not buy a house without it.